Welcome today, everyone, to the WBCA and the NABC Coaches Forum on the topic of search firm engagement. I'm Dr. China Ju, the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Denver Broncos, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's discussion. Now, I'm sure you're probably wondering, like, why is a person from a football team moderating this particular discussion? Well, as a former athletic director, I had a great women's basketball team and an Elite Eight basketball team, and there was some wonderful memories during my time and working as an athletic director at a couple of universities. So I am so excited to be a part of this. But before I introduce our panelists, I would like to take a moment to thank our partners at Marriott Bonvoy for their support of the WBCA and the NABC and the Coaches Forum series. And let's go ahead and begin by introducing our panelists. Craig Littlepage, he's the Senior Advisor for the Collegiate Sports Associate. Hi, Craig.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you, China.
So glad that you could join us. Diane Murphy is the Vice President at the Pictor Group. Good morning, Diane.
Morning, my friend. Good morning.
And Delana Johnson from Parker Search Firm. Great to see you, Delana.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's great to see everyone.
Well, thanks to each of you for taking time today to share your wisdom and insight with NABC and WBCA coaches. And if time permits, we're going to take questions toward the end of the hour. So send your questions using the Q&A function. Okay, let's go ahead and kick this off. This is a New York style format. We're going to, feel free to chime off of each other's answers because I know people on the call definitely want to learn a lot about this process. So let's go ahead and start with you, Delana. Talk to us in regards to how many searches that, Parker or even you specifically, and I'm sure it's a lot, have oversaw, whether you do it by the average or by the season.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, it varies season by season, dependent upon how many dominoes are falling, so to speak, where these movements are happening. I think something that I am very excited about is the amount of institutions that have been utilizing search firms for their women's basketball coach searches. So we did probably about a handful last year. I'd probably say maybe 3 or so. I know we worked with UVA, we worked with Vanderbilt, we also worked with UT Chattanooga. So a little sparse there. We also worked with USC as well. So it kind of ebbs and flows depending upon the relationships, of course, that you have with those ADs. Now on the men's side, especially because of the visibility, we know the resources that they have, oftentimes they can utilize that funding to be able to involve a search firm. So last year we had a monster year, but I think a lot of that was coming out of COVID. Many people got contract extensions or even just the belief of, we know it was a hard year. We're going to give you some time to kind of rebound, especially as we look at some of the changing policies with the NIL addition, the transfer portal, just kind of letting coaches to settle in from there. So I would probably say, we average a good amount of searches. It's hard to put a number on it because it ebbs and flows, but we're usually involved in many of them.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And Craig, you are a basketball guy yourself. So you have a great history in this particular sport. Where does that stand in regards to your company?
Yeah, so similar to Delana, I have difficulty, quantifying it, but we have had everything from Power 5 head coaches, particularly on the men's side, to the lower Division I programs and so forth. We've also, in the last 2 years, been a little bit more active and have been blessed to have an opportunity to do a couple of women's searches. We did Towson University and Temple last year among the women's searches. We do have very high volume in terms of AD searches, and a lot of times AD searches might lead to spin off to opportunities somewhere down the road to work with ADs that we were instrumental in their placement if they should have football women's or men's head basketball coaching searches. We're also doing a number of searches in the Olympic sports, and then some of the other senior administrative positions like development directors in particular. But as relates to men's and women's basketball, I would say, I'm just pulling a number out of the top, probably in the last 18 months, probably 18 or so, maybe, and that may be a little bit high, but the numbers kind of run together from year to year. But we are very active and feel very, very blessed to have opportunities to not only work with the institutions in terms of trying to generate a pool, but having the opportunity as a result of that to get to know some of the assistant coaches, particularly that are on that fast track and are moving in a direction to be bona fide candidates for some of these head coaching positions.
Wonderful. I appreciate that. And so, entering into a new space, Diane, you've been very involved. The Pictor Group have been very involved in a lot of administrative searches, and now you're coming in with fresh eyes. What are some of the things that you're really excited about as you are navigating through the basketball space?
We're very excited to get into this space. As you can imagine, they're wonderful and very, very confident and competent search firms out there. So it's a very competitive environment for us. Our consulting firm has been around for about 6 years. And while we have not really focused on searches, we're just now getting into that business. We've done more things like strategic planning, athletic program reviews, executive coaching, some things like that. But we have done athletic director searches, been very successful in that area, primarily at the mid-major and Division II and Division III level. And we've also done a nonprofit CEO search. And so we're really looking to get into this space because our firm has a big, strong background in women's basketball in particular. So we're really excited about that and appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let me kick you another question. So being a former athletic director, 2 of our 3 panelists were former athletic directors. So you definitely know how to evaluate talent as well as be able to serve as a great teammate to head coaches collectively. But on this call, we have a significant number of assistant coaches on this call. So we're going to really dive in, Diane, to kind of talk about, what are some of those particular tangible skills that an assistant coach needs in order to look attractive for a head coach role?
Well, remember, when you move that one chair to the left or to the right, it becomes a whole different ball game. And so as a head coach, you really are an ambassador. You really are the CEO of your program. And so having those organizational and administrative skills are so important. Being able to be a good ambassador for university and working with the alumni and donors is really important. You're also going to be a friend, fan, and fundraiser. So having those skills are going to be very important to you, particularly at private universities and smaller Division II and Division III schools that are so reliant on those funds. So you really have to think about it in terms of being a CEO. You don't know what you don't know necessarily until you get in the big chair. The intensity that comes at you, the scrutiny that comes at you, being prepared for that, being able to manage up to your athletic director and understanding how to communicate effectively with him or her are really important. And of course, I always have advice for people is find something that you can be the absolute best at, whether that is being the best recruiter, the best out of bounds coach, but find something that you can be the absolute best at. And I'll stop there and let my 2 other colleagues respond.
Well, I want to tap into Craig's brain in regards to how an assistant coach can be able to shine with those tangible skills without outshining the head coach. How can that person step up and be able to be recognized, when a vacancy happened. So what are some of those things that when you're looking, Craig, that you're like, hey, that's going to be a great, head coach in the future that we need to take into consideration?
With the tee up of your question, the first thing that comes to mind is that the assistant coach better have a significantly strong relationship with his or her head coach, because you are not going to advance unless you are aligned with the head coach, and unless you have the blessing of the head coach. And I've seen a lot of situations where an assistant coach might want to be in pursuit of a position, but they have difficulty being able to actually put their toe in the water, because I don't want my head coach to know, because of the perception that the head coach might think that the assistant coach prospective candidate is trying to bail out on him. So I would say that making sure that that relationship with the head coach is always paramount. The number one priority to become a strong head coaching candidate, in my opinion, is doing the very best job at the job that you have right now, which is as an assistant coach. The title may be associate head coach or something like that, but you want to be doing the absolute best job every single day. Another thing that I would say is, the communication skills, the concept of the assistant coach, prospective head coach candidate, being a colleague, and a director of athletics that's evaluating the assistant coach and candidate wants to know that every one of his or her head coaches is in fact going to be a colleague and a partner, and will want to see themselves as not just a leader within that particular program, basketball, football, lacrosse, whatever it might be, but also be a leader within the athletics department, but even beyond that, a senior leader within the university, and a senior leader within the university community. And I think all that comes back to the communication skills that I believe that Diane referenced and turned to or mentioned very quickly. So I think that those are the kinds of things that the X's and O's are a given.
Right.
The integrity piece is a given. I think much more important now than maybe 20 years ago is the relationship building with the coaching staff, whether it's the head coach or the assistant coach, with the student athletes that are in the program. And so much more now, we all know, is being focused on, mental health and the well-being of the student athletes and so forth. But an athletics director is going to want to know about how the head coaching prospect is going to be able to develop deep relationships with his or her players, and to be able to help develop them, build them as young men and young women and future leaders once they finish their playing careers, wherever those careers might take them.
Wonderful. Well, Delana, let's start from the beginning of when you get the word that a university is looking for a coach, and your firm has that search. So take us through the steps on how do you get to know a little bit about the president's expectation or the athletics director's expectation, the university community. Kind of walk us through that process. And then, of course, Diane, Craig, feel free to chip in if there's some similarities of the process or if you do some things differently.
No, happy to do so. And thank you for the question, China. So, the first thing that we always say is that we are experts in search. However, we're not experts at the institution that we're working with. So the amount of information that we're really able to gather from a candidate or a desired candidate profile is going to be very important. So as you start to work with the AD or the president, whoever is involved at that time, sometimes they may have a full search committee, including an FAR, people from, campus, people from the athletic department. Or sometimes it may be a smaller committee, depending upon the visibility or level of the position. You may just be working with an AD, a president or chancellor, and then maybe a key donor or alumni, something like that from that perspective. And so as we talk about not being experts in the institution, the first stage that we want to focus on is that information gathering, whether it's coming from the AD or the president. We'll also conduct a number of what we call listening sessions. So that's our opportunity to really be able to talk to different constituent groups, different stakeholders, and really get their perspective. Everyone comes to an institution with a different lens, And so it's important to understand, as Craig and Diane both mentioned, having that campus partner. What does that look like working with the academic side of the campus? What does that look like working with alumni and other community members? And then our student athletes, also our staff within the athletic department. So that's where we start first. What are the desired candidate profile that we're looking for? But as we develop that, why has the position come open in the first place? That's what I tell a lot of coaches to think about. Sometimes the coach has done really well. They've been plucked off to another opportunity, or another opportunity has opened up. So that may change the dynamics of the candidate profile they're looking for. They're looking for a sustainer, someone that's been a part of a transitional program where, again, the program is not broken by any means. We're looking for someone to come in, of course, add your own philosophical and strategic plan of how you want to run and operate that program. But we don't need a whole lot of building or, redesign or restructuring there. Or you may be in a situation where, unfortunately, the program has not been successful and we do need a change in direction. And so how do we really identify what are the areas that we were not successful in? Yes, it's easy to point to offensive strategy or defensive strategy, player personnel, support staff. It's easy to identify other people that are responsible for that. But sometimes there is a disconnect and alignment with the leadership in the athletic department in terms of where their program wants to go. So once we've started to have those conversations, we then identify what that candidate pool starts to look like. I think what's very important for assistant coaches to know is that oftentimes when a search firm is involved, your AD or your president or chancellor is already coming with a short list. So when you think about your networking ability, really make sure that you're connecting not just with athletic directors, but with the sport administrators at those institutions as well. They're oftentimes involved in those searches. So some of the questions I'm sure we'll get is, how do you get on somebody's radar? How do you expand your network? So that's a big piece of it. Now, as a search firm, our job is to also supplement that list with other coaches or candidates that we've come across throughout our networking and our abilities to have conversations to really see what is the right group here. I think oftentimes search firms get hit with the stigma that we're going to the same stable of candidates. And, it's hard for that to be true because each job is so different. Even though the title is the same, the needs, everything about that department may be different. Now, there may be some profiles that are similar. For example, if we're looking at a position, last year with UVA and their women's basketball coach search, Carla was very looking for a person that could recruit the 757. So with that being said, if you're not a coach that has those recruiting ties, not to say that you wouldn't be involved in the search, but it may be a little bit harder for you to get that same traction as someone that's coming with those same recruitment ties or areas of strength. So that's always important to where we work with there. I think outside of that, the process moves very quickly. So the other thing that I always say is make sure that you are ready to go. You've thought about the positions that are of interest to you and not just your desire to become a head coach, but really thinking about the institutional profile. How are they set up? How are they structured? What are the resources that they have as well? If you're someone that has been in departments where you haven't heard the word no a lot before, sometimes that can impact the way that you're able to transition into a program where you may have to be a little bit more in the trenches or kind of bootstrapping it, so to speak, to really get the resources that your program needs to be successful. So once we've really started to develop that candidate pool, the next thing that we'll start to arrange for our client is the intro call. I think that's one of the biggest things that has changed throughout the interview process, is that it used to be you go straight into the interview, maybe they'll go directly into a finalist round. It'll be a very quick process. But now we're really doing that 20, 30-minute phone or Zoom call just to get to know you. I think as we talked about earlier, what are those things that we're looking for a prospective head coach candidate, whether they're a first-time head coach or they've been one before, is philosophically and strategically, how are you going to articulate who you are as a coach, the impact and influence you can have in a program, and then what's that connection that you have with the AD or the chancellor or the president. Each personality is different. So even though you coach, even though you won, even though you've been successful, you just may not be the right person that meshes with the dynamics of the department that we have to be aware of. So we key in on those kind of things as well: personality, communication style, maybe what your story or upbringing is. Oftentimes we think about the profile of an institution. Let's take a North Texas, for example. They're a minority serving institution, they're a Hispanic serving institution. Many of their students are coming from underrepresented groups. And so that's probably going to be pretty reflective of the kind of kids that they're bringing in to their program as well. So even thinking about your background, your upbringing, how you're able to relate to students and put them in a position to be successful even beyond your program is important as well. So Once we get through that initial intro conversation, then we may start to get into more of the X's and O's, coaching style, recruiting style, what your benefits are, and things of that nature. So that process looks a little bit different depending upon what that AD needs. And then once they've kind of whittled that initial pool down to the areas of focus or the people of focus, then we'll move into that finalist round. Sometimes that's at an airport location. Many of us have heard of that airport round of interviews where we want to be confidential. We want to make sure we're able to bring people in and out without, tipping off anyone. Or we may conduct interviews right here in our office in Atlanta. And so bringing in those individuals to really get down to the nitty gritty of, now that we understand who you are philosophically, what your strategic plan is, now we're going to start to give you some more numbers about our program. What does our staff support look like? What does our recruiting budget look like? And really start to have you break down the metrics and how you would really operate a program from there. So I know that's pretty high level. There's a lot of other steps that go in with that as well, but that's pretty much how the process starts, what it looks like moving through, and then where we kind of end up from there.
China, if I could just jump in, and I think Delaney did a wonderful job taking everybody through those steps. And at CSA, our process is very, very consistent with that. But one of the things that I do with my professional development hat on is a presentation on what search firms do and what search firms don't do. And Delaney touched on this a little bit in talking about the perception that sometimes candidates have that the same candidates get circulated through these searches multiple times during a given cycle. And I think what happens when candidates their names seem to pop up at maybe 2 or 3 openings during the course of a given hiring cycle, it's more of the institution, the client institution's expression of interest in the candidates, as opposed to the search firms putting these candidates in on multiple occasions. So I think that Delaney was very, very good in just talking about that as a topic and being an issue, because for those that are trying to get in, get their foot in the door, and they see the same names popping up, that there is that perception, well, the search firms have a preference toward this person. The person's been in multiple searches, that sort of thing. It's basically that the client, institutional client, may request that somebody be scrutinized, vetted as a potential candidate, a potential fit. And one other thing that I'll mention is, and again, it was brought up, and I think Diane as well mentioned this, the ability to articulate your vision, all the things that go into your program, to be able to articulate that in X's and O's as well, in such a way that an athletics director who may not have been a coach or may not have been a student athlete, to a president whose interest is not in whether you're going to play up and down and press, or if you're going to play half court basketball. You've got to be able to articulate all these things in such a way that it's understandable to somebody that may be just on the fringe of an athletics program and a basketball program.
And if I could just
go for it.
I would just say, because I think they've both covered it, I'm not sure that we need to spend much more time on that, but I think to Craig's point, coaches often have a tendency to talk too much. And so one of the things, and I can say that because I was one, one of the things that I say, I have a lot of clients that I work with in terms of being an executive coach, and I say to them often, listen more and talk less. And when you do talk, be compelling, be clear, and be concise. Especially as we know more and more presidents are CEOs of companies, or more and more athletic directors have not coached. They more come from the business model. So being able to articulate your vision to people that are not basketball people.
I appreciate you saying that. Craig, I just wanted to let you know your video is sideways. So I'm not sure if that's a me thing or your video, but I'm going to go back to Diane to ask the question about, I love how you say coaches talk too much. I love that. No disrespect to your coaches on the call,
Checked
But
out.
one of the things that I've noticed, being a former athletic director myself, when I have a vacancy, I wind up getting calls
Yes.
all over the country from total strangers who want to recommend a particular, coach. And what is happening is, I think that there's this mindset of, if I can get the biggest name in the coaching industry to call on my behalf, I'm going to get this job. So Diane, how do you kind of manage, do you get those type of calls as a firm? Does the athletic director or the president say, I'm getting all of these calls, this is ridiculous? So can you speak on that?
It's
And the recommendation to our coaches, hey, don't have the world call these ADs or something like that,
Right. Don't have the world call these ADs. First of all, the AD, if the AD is working with a search firm, that's one reason that the AD has hired that search firm, is to manage some of that. And they can't manage all of it because people are going to call anyway. But the time that it takes to listen to those calls, return those calls, it's an overwhelming, time-consuming process. So I would say discretion is always very important, and who is making that call on your behalf. One year when we were doing a search for a head men's basketball coach at Columbia when I was the AD, we had one high-profile men's basketball coach that called me 5 times about 5 different candidates that he was recommending. And I am like, which one of these 5 would be the best fit for us? And so you want to be smart about it, and you want to wait until that person advances into the process. And so I would just say to be smart about it, be strategic about it. If you're going to have someone make a call for you, make sure that he or she knows you, knows your strengths, knows your weaknesses, can speak to your good points, but then also can be candid about things, because that trust factor is so important when you're trying to help place a coach. You want to be able to know that you can trust that person. And so I will leave it to my colleagues to add to that, but it is overwhelming, and it takes a lot of time away from what you're really trying to do, is to try to find the right candidate that's the right fit for your institution. So be strategic about it and be smart about it.
Mhm.
I
Delana,
would add,
go for it.
first of all, China, is my picture
You
on
are
right now?
perfect now.
Okay.
You're perfect.
I apologize. I'm working off of my phone today. My computer's down, so I'm working off of my phone, and it tends to be a little bit quirky. The thing that I would add to the point that Diane just made is, as a prospective candidate, if you know that you're going to be interested in getting into the cycle in a given hiring season, don't wait until you are getting ready to apply for the job to be checking in with your references. The thing that drives me crazy is when I start getting a phone call on February 28th from somebody that I know really well, that the only time I hear from them is when they want me to serve as a reference, to make a call, or to write a letter. You are better off developing that relationship throughout the year, so that when that call does come, the person on the other end that's supposed to be your advocate is not going to be rolling their eyeballs. Well, the only time I hear from this person is when they need something from me. So develop that relationship and work on that relationship throughout the year, so that you don't have to have an hour-long conversation with your reference to talk about all the things that you've been doing throughout the year to develop your portfolio. To develop your portfolio as a bona fide candidate.
That's a really good point. Delana, I know you probably want to chime in on this, but I'm going to throw another question on top of your response too, because I would love to hear. I know that coaches go to the conventions. I have went to a couple of conventions myself as an athletic director when I had vacancies. Many times I see assistant coaches, they're working that hotel lobby, and it's a head scratcher for me because those assistant coaches who I have interacted with, they want to be head coaches. And so I'm asking myself, well, if you want to be a head coach and you're an assistant, why are you in the hotel lobby with head coaches? Shouldn't you be in the room with athletic directors?
Yes,
Should
that
you
is
be
the
in?
number one
Yes.
point. And I'm glad, and I'm going to compound those answers
Yes.
because I do want to piggyback off of what Diane and Craig just said. The first thing is I call them kingmakers, and I really want to stress the importance of what Diane said of having a reference that can speak to your abilities. What we all have talked about on this call, it's more than just your ability to coach X's and O's. So I think it's great when someone calls me and says, this person is a defensive genius, or, the systems that they run and the play sets, things of that nature. That's fine and dandy. But what I'm also looking for is that person's understanding of the institution you're even applying to. So like Craig said, you need some insight into where the program is, what they've looked like historically. I've done mock interviews with coaches, and I throw out the question of what is your perception of our program right now? Some coaches can't give me an answer. They haven't looked at the roster. They haven't really taken a deep dive. They're just so ready to talk about the schemes that they would run or things of that nature that they're missing the real tangible pieces of what it looks like to make a program successful. So it's okay to supplement that, but I think when you're thinking about key 4 to 5 individuals that can speak on your behalf, it's nice to have a sponsor. So that's always, good to have an individual that has some credibility within the league. You come from an extensive tree, so that's a good thing to have. But then also making sure that you cover all the bases from a 360 perspective of what you can really bring to the table philosophically and strategically. I think to your point, that is my biggest area when I'm working with coaches. The main thing that I talk about is I want coaches to be successful, whether it's a search through us or not. If Diane is running a search, if Craig is running a search, I want to be a resource to you because we're not going to have every search. And so the way that you're able to best prepare and navigate through those search processes, I'm always happy to help. And in order for me to do that, what I think is great is providing those connection points, like you said, to sport administrators, to athletic directors, because those are the individuals, as I mentioned earlier, that are creating the short list in the first place. So in order for you to really get on somebody's radar, when you're going to a game at a visitor site, look up who the sport administrator is, look up who the athletic director is, try to have coffee or meet with them just prior to the game or things of that nature. I'll be honest with you, coaches have so much dead time. I know that they are working hard, they're watching film, they're scouting, they're recruiting, they're doing everything, but you do have a couple minutes during the day where you can make those connection points. I think the same thing is the same when you're working with a search firm. To Craig's point, when we are getting into the search cycle, that's not the first time I should hear from you. You really got to have an ongoing, genuine, engaging relationship where we're talking about things that are happening in your program. If you're playing on TV that night and that's your scout, that's when I want to hear from you. So I can look at the game, I can see your presence, I can see your impact, and just be able to dive a little bit deeper. I think it's interesting when I try to maintain connections and relationships with coaches and I'll reach out, I won't hear anything. And then as soon as there's been a coaching transition and now you need a job, now you're like, oh, hey, Delana, I just wanted to check in and see how everything is going. And the important distinction is I'm not an agent. So I don't sit around thinking about how am I going to get Coach A job. I think about am I going to represent my client and help them to get in front of a diverse pool of candidates that can really give them different insights and perspectives. So you always have to be mindful of the impression you're creating and not coming off like an ambulance chaser. To Craig's point, if I'm just now hearing from you February 28th and the dominoes are about to fall and we're going through, we're so busy that's not the time I'm trying to field a bunch of text messages or phone calls. I'm trying to get these interviews scheduled. I'm trying to contact these coaches, work with their agents, all types of things. So to your point, that's the main thing that a lot of coaches need to start doing is networking with administrators. Go back to your alma mater, go back to places that maybe you got your start as a graduate assistant or you got your start. I mean, I was a student athlete at UCF, and that has opened so many doors when I think about the same administrators that supported me as a student athlete and where they are now. That's a natural connection and network that you can have as you're really growing through the industry with one another. So to your point, it's great to be networking with other head coaches because you never know what opportunities are out there to join somebody else's bench or elevate or just get a different experience and exposure from a level program standpoint, a regional standpoint, what have you. But the main thing is, if you really feel like you're ready to be a head coach, start networking with those administrators. And the key there is what you can bring into the conversation. I tell coaches, subscribe to the D1 ticker, subscribe to College AD, know what is going on in our industry outside of just your department or your program, because that's what those administrators want to hear. Do you have a pulse on the landscape, and can you be a partner to help us elevate beyond just the success of our program?
I love that. I got to finger snap you on that one. That is great because it's the whole CEO. And if, there's a very narrow scope of your role and you're only thinking, hey, I want to protect my program. It's all about X's and O's, and I'm just evaluated on wins and losses, and not contributing to the overall community of a university, that could be a challenge when it comes to learning more about the expectations of that CEO of that university.
And I do want to add to that, China, because I do want to give or acknowledge that's the hardest thing for an assistant coach, because the way that you get in the room is your win-loss record. It's your contributions, the success that you've had. But now that you're in the room, how do you now change that conversation to where they get more insight into where your mind is from a program management standpoint? So I do want to say, I know that's a really hard struggle because you do want to win, but you've also got to get beyond that as well.
I appreciate you clarifying that. Yeah, Diane?
Don't forget that there are folks on your on-campus, like admissions, financial aid, multicultural affairs, student services, that you need to have that relationship with those folks, because those people are often asked at conferences, hey, I know our institution's going to be hiring a coach. Do you know of anyone?
Mm-hmm.
And you have not developed those relationships with those key people on your own campus, you may be missing an opportunity there. And so, yeah.
I'm sorry, Diane. I didn't mean to interrupt. And the reason that point that you made, Diane, is so important is because let's say that the institution is going to formulate a search committee. They're going to formulate that search committee with the dean of students, with the director of admissions, with a senior vice president of development. And when those types of people are on a search committee and they know that there's a prospect from, you name the institution, they're going to call their colleagues at that institution to find out what they know about the candidate that's at that particular school. So you make a great point that those relationships are invaluable.
And one other point, one other point. Don't forget your own athletic director on your campus. There was because you don't know when the head coach may be going somewhere. And if you haven't taken the time to get to know your own athletic director or your sport administrator that you may be reporting to, and more coaches are reporting to sport administrators, particularly at Division II and III and mid-majors, and a job comes open at your particular institution, they may not even consider you because they don't know who you are, because you just stayed in the film room watching tape. So get to know your AD.
One other point that I would make, and all of our assistant coaches on the call, make a note of this. The most underutilized reference in terms of being able to get one's name as a potential candidate, the most underutilized reference is your conference's associate commissioner in charge of basketball operations. These are the people that are working with basketball in your conference every single day. They are focused on that. And if you have the opportunity to develop a relationship with anybody outside of your own institution that can help get your name as a potential candidate, it's those people that are looking at basketball 24 hours a day throughout the course of the year. Those people can be extremely instrumental. When, particularly in Power 5 conferences, there's a major coach opening, football, men's or women's basketball. A lot of times the institution, the client institution, is checking with the conference commissioner or somebody related to that sport to find out a little bit more about who potential candidates might be. So don't forget about the possibility of somebody like the Associate Commissioner for Basketball Operations as being somebody with whom you can develop a relationship, and that person can help further some of the things that you're looking to do with the advancement of your career.
That is a great point. I had, when I was at the University of Wyoming, I was there for 3 years, and I led the women's basketball search. And it was a great experience to learn a little bit from my athletic director, what was important to him. And one of the things that I definitely appreciated he mentioned was student athletes, making sure that there's a connection with student athletes. I'm going to a question that was sent to us on the chat about the modern day athletes.
Mhm.
And by extension, how the hiring parties are looking for a coach who can really connect to the needs of the athletes. How much weight does that play when it comes to finding that great coach?
I'll jump in on that one and then let my colleagues add to that. That is really important because we're reading more and more and more across the country about coaches, and not necessarily basketball coaches, but coaches of other sports that are being terminated for allegedly being abusive with their student athletes, whether it be psychological or mental or whatever, verbal. And so that piece is really important. And coaching today's athlete really requires an excellent communicator and someone that can still coach hard, but that does not cross that line to being demeaning or abusive. And of course, everybody may have their own interpretation as to what that means. But it is very important that coaches understand that they have got to be a positive coach, and that they have got to be able to communicate with today's student athlete. And that takes building trust. Trust is so important, and building trust and treating athletes with respect and dignity and care, and really listening to them that I was talking about a minute ago, really taking the time to listen what student athletes are saying. Mm-hmm. You can't just tell them anymore what to do. You have to explain to them why we're doing it and why it's important that they engage in that, and what's in it for them is really important. And so I would say that piece, athletic directors, presidents are looking at that piece a lot, because they do not want to see their institution running across the ticker on ESPN or reading in the New York Times or the Washington Post that their coach has been accused of being abusive behavior. Presidents do not want to see that. Athletic directors do not want to see that. So to me, I think it's really important that coaches understand communication, relationships, genuine relationships, professional relationships are critical to being a successful coach in today's generation of coaches.
Okay.
I'll put Diane's words into neon lights that are flashing. All you have to think about in this regard is transfer portal. Transfer portal. And if you're not developing relationships with your kids throughout the course of the year, you're going to be bothered by all the noise that's associated with the transfer portal, and who in your program is thinking about going into the portal, going to a different institution, et cetera. That's one of the reasons that is important. In addition to the perception of your president and your AD and the perception of your program, but it's a part of your job to make sure that you have created a stable, healthy environment that your kids are going to want to be a part of, without regard to how much they're playing, what role they're playing, how many points they're scoring, et cetera. Transfer portal. If you're not doing the job in terms of the communication and the development of the relationship with your kids, your school is going to be in that transfer portal more often than you would like.
So
Delana?
sorry. Oh, thank you, Jack. So a couple things that I wanted to throw in there. So to Diane's point, communication is paramount. And I think what we talk about in communication is transparency of expectations. I will be honest with you, as a former student athlete, I'm very torn in where we are today, because you do want to be mindful of the pressures that our student athletes have to balance. You want to be attentive to their mental health and their well-being. But I also think that this era of young people, as I would say, is dramatically different in terms of what their expectations are, but also their expectations on the return on investment. As we start to talk about the transfer portal, as we start to talk about NIL, you can build the best relationship you possibly can with a student, and that still may lead them to going into the transfer portal or seeking another opportunity. So I think the main thing that we want to focus on is transparency and expectations. To Diane's point, as we're listening to the needs of our different student athletes, how are we tailoring our approach to each individual student that we have? If we know that someone has influences in their life, maybe it's a grandparent or a guardian, or, and we're talking about basketball here, so a handler, an AAU coach, a high school coach. Think about also their circle of influence and who else you may need to build a relationship with to get that kid on your team as well, or on your side as well. So I think in this sense, it takes a village to raise a program. I think from the roster management standpoint as well, even as we start to look at the transfer portal, doing your due diligence to really figure out why that kid is in the transfer portal in the first place. Sometimes it's not alignment with, or sometimes it's not a lack of alignment with the coaches. It's a difference in expectations.
Right.
I see myself here. My productivity has been here. I may not want to listen to those things. So I think you still have to coach, you have to develop, but we also have to prepare our young people today for life outside of our sport, because this is very much a generational thing, I would say. I think it is going to bottom out as more movement and progression happens. So I think that is important. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is, how does an assistant coach talk about this if they're not asked directly? That's where I hear a lot of assistant coaches struggle, is if they had just asked me that directly, I would have talked about it. The thing that really separates head coach candidates is their ability to get beyond the question. What's important to you naturally is going to, or what's important to you is going to come out naturally in a conversation. So if philosophically you prioritize student athlete welfare, student athlete well-being, whether I ask you that directly or not, that's going to come out in your game strategy, in your game preparation. When we're asking you things, that's how you're talking about tailoring your approach, thinking about the way you break down film, the way you go through your walkthroughs, being able to relate individually to your players' skill sets, to how they learn best, the environment, what connections they have with coaches, who they need to really relate and build from. Sometimes it's not the head coach. Sometimes it's the assistant coach. Sometimes it's the person that recruited you into a program that may have departed for another position. So how are we maintaining that continuity and that synergy to make sure that you're still staying a part of our program, and that you do want to see us be successful, whether you're on the bench or you're contributing on the court as well. So I did want to bring attention to those things where I don't think that we need to necessarily give in to all of the demands of our student athletes, because again, we've all been 18 to 22. The things that I thought were right when I was 18 are much different than when I am now. So you still need that advice, that mentorship, that reality check sometimes. But I think, again, it's in your communication and it's in the relationship that you have with that student, so they know it's coming from a place of love. But there are also expectations, the external pressures that coaches are receiving from donors, alumni. Daniel and I were just talking about this morning how people live from week to week. You win one game and now we're thinking you're the coach of the year. You lose the next game and now we want to completely gut the whole program. So you've got to be able to manage that and also bring your players along so they understand sometimes the pressure is coming out in different ways. So how do we manage that? What's the ways that you all need to be best communicated with, so I'm not creating an atmosphere of animosity or favoritism or things of that nature? So it's a lot of dynamics that go into that coaches have to continuously navigate in this era today.
Hey, so Delana, I do want to squeeze in a quick question. And I know we're running short on time, and then I'll jump to you, Diane, on what you wanted to follow up on. We received a question about you mentioning about agents. Your mention of agents, and the question is, how important is seeking representation in this process?
So I really think it depends on where you are in your career. I think it also depends on even the communication you have with your agents. A lot of agents are, they're out here representing coaches. A lot of them have it set up where they only get a portion of your contract when you become a head coach. So you really have to start to think about time is money. So if I'm seeking representation, am I at the point in my career where I'm even eligible or qualified for head coach positions? I know a lot of people have a difference in where they think they are versus where they actually are. So that's important because you want to make sure that you're not just seeking representation because you think that's going to help you. There's still a lot of legwork that the coach has to do themselves. An agent, most of the time, when I'm working with an agent, they're either as Diane mentioned earlier, sending over recommendations. They may know that we're working on a search and may send me a couple profiles of coaches that they feel like fit the bill. So that's my initial interaction with an agent. But oftentimes I'm really not working with the agent until the end of the process when it starts to come down to the contract negotiation. So a lot of times I'm working directly with a coach. So if you're in a place where you're successful, you're going to get that call 9 times out of 10, regardless of whether you have representation or not. But I think what's helpful is if you're struggling with the networking side of things, if you're struggling with the material side of things, I know a lot of agents do professional development for their coaches. They help them to really prepare for what those interviews look like. And so I think it really depends. I mean, it's great. I have great relationships with agents. I go to games with them and things of that nature. So it helps to a certain extent, but you want to make sure that you're not being totally reliant on your agent and you're letting your foot off the gas as well. It's really a partnership from that perspective.
Appreciate that. Diane, you wanted to follow up on the previous question?
To follow up very briefly on what Delana was saying toward the end of that, it's really important that a coach understands how to manage his or her stress, how they take time for themselves, how they understand that exercise and nutrition and rest and reflection are so important because whether they realize it or not, their stress will come out and players know it.
Yeah.
The players know it. And so how do you manage that stress to where it's a positive stress, but you're taking care of yourself? Because your players know when you're stressed. Whether you may know it or not, they know it. They know it.
I love that. I love that. We are getting closer to the end of our time, and trust me, I have about 50 more questions to ask. Unfortunately, we're not able to address all of them, but let's wrap it up by each one of you responding to how do our assistant coaches, how are they able to connect with your firm? What is the best way of connecting with your firm? You want to start, Craig?
Sure. Well, I think that there's the direct communication, and as a result of activities like this, sharing of our contact information, I'm willing to engage with prospective candidates in terms of everything from a 15-minute phone call check-in to receiving a quote playbook that has their outline of what they would do as a potential head coach, to actually meeting at places like conference tournaments and Final Fours and so forth. So all those things would be on the table, at least in terms of my personal activities as a member of Collegiate Sports Associates.
Wonderful. Thank you. Delana.
Yes, on top of what Craig said, I think I'm open to all of those things as well. The other thing that I absolutely love is that we are based here in Atlanta, Georgia. There's a lot of tournaments that go on here. There's a lot of games that are played, whether you're at Georgia State, Kennesaw State, Georgia Southern, Georgia Tech, I mean, you name it. So a lot of schools are often coming through the area, whether they're recruiting, they're playing, et cetera. So I think it's always good to reach out. Let's meet in person. I'm happy to bring people up to the office. Not extensive. I think we have to be mindful of time. So as Craig said, 15 to 20 minutes is about all I need. And then, but if you're playing or if you're competing, love to see you, love to see how the team responds to you, things of that nature, because there are intangibles that you can observe just being in front of somebody or things of that nature. But that's the other thing I would offer is that if you're in the city, please reach out and let us know. I don't live in the city. I live about 50 minutes north of it. And so I'm in a very popular county. And so I'll meet coaches when they're going to Grayson High School or they're going to different high schools. We'll find a coffee shop right around there, meet for, 20 minutes or so, and then kind of call it a day. So I think those check-ins, that getting in front of people is really important. And then building that network from there. Once you start to find those associations or those common people that you have, then that really takes the conversation to the next level, because you're finding that common ground, so we can get beyond just ball, but really start to learn about who you are as a person.
Excellent. Diane.
Certainly all the things that they both have said, so I won't repeat all that, but you can certainly find us on our website and contact us, and we will, I promise you, we will get back to you and spend some quality time with you.
And I definitely agree with all three of you, because each one of you, I can reach out to you, say hi, and I'm not looking for a job, but I mean, all three of you are approachable, and you definitely connect in so many different ways. I would like to offer the suggestion also for the assistant coaches is get to know different administrators. Don't sleep on the senior woman administrators. Don't sleep on the compliance staff, because when there are conversations about is the program clean? Are you turning in your paperwork on time? Are you balancing the budget? Those conversations may come up. And so the senior administrators in those respective areas can also speak on your behalf. So I think that that's very important. And as a former athletic director who would go to the WBCA and the NABC conventions, there are functions where athletic administrators and presidents are around. Now, how do you get into those spaces? You have to navigate accordingly. Corey, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just one more thing. And I think we touched on it very, very briefly, but there are any number of different platforms to which materials can be submitted. NABC, WBCA. There's the Division I Connect, which receives materials on prospective candidates from any number of different positions. So I think it's just a matter of all of our assistant coaches today, just understanding all the opportunities that are out there to get your name more exposed, if you will, to decision makers in the industry.
And lastly, if I can say, listen, coaches, listen to what the search firms are telling you. When you're getting feedback about how to clean up your resume or how to polish your cover letter, listen, because these people are the experts in the business, and they know what people are looking for. So be open and listen. It'd be very helpful.
Great advice, Diane, Delana, Craig. I really appreciate you. Thank you again to our panelists for giving your time to speak on today's webinar. And we would also like to once again thank our partners at Marriott Bonvoy for their support. Now, if you missed any of today's webinar, or if any of your coaching friends miss it, make sure you let them know that there is a full replay that will be available in the coming days at WBCA.org or NABC.com. Thank you for tuning in, and happy holidays, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Pleasure to be here today.
Thank you.